The IT sector in India has been beaten down quite a bit in the recent months. This is also evident in the quarterly results of companies. A slowdown in key markets, including the US and Europe, has been one of the reasons for the stress. Analysts are of the opinion that in the short to medium term, the IT sector could continue to face headwinds. A recent report by JP Morgan also paints a similar picture of the industry. The brokerage says that deferred project starts, project halts and cancellations are likely to persist.
It's been a turbulent time for the Indian IT industry. In fact, shares of the entire IT pack have been beaten down this year. The recent quarterly earnings also reflect the macroeconomic uncertainty companies are facing. The banking crisis in the United States and Europe, high global inflation lending to a rising interest rate scenario have all led to a marked slowdown in key markets, including US and Europe. A combination of all these factors are taking a toll on IT companies. As a result, clients have been cutting costs, especially reducing discretionary spending. This has led to a reduced demand for its services, impacted deal conversions and even delays in projects. Analysts believe that the sector will continue to face these headwinds in the short to medium term. However, with the end of the interest rate tightening cycle somewhere on the horizon now, there are hopes that demand will start picking up. In fact, CEO of Mphasis says that green shoots of activity build-up are now visible, but that this phase of uncertainty for the sector could last another 3 to 6 months. Meanwhile, the artificial intelligence disruption is also something that the industry is still coming to terms with. With many companies pouring money into AI, the jury is still out on how the integration of AI within the IT space will play out.
They've also said that increased competition for a smaller pie could trigger falling win rates, pressures on pricing and deteriorating deal terms. Well, joining me now to talk a lot more on all of that is the CEO of one of India's leading IT companies, Mphasis. Nitin Rakesh now joins us to talk about the outlook for Mphasis and for the IT sector, and of course, that overall question of how AI is going to impact all of this. Nitin, thank you so much. Always a pleasure speaking to you. Let me start off by asking for your views. How is Mphasis doing, and if you want to say something about how the broader IT industry is doing?
Thanks for having me, Vikram. I think we're going through a pretty interesting phase in our sector, and of course, in general, in the environment with the business macro as well. Firstly, I think we probably lived through a 50-year first with the kind of macro environment we've dealt with in the Western world in the last 12 months. And as we kind of emerge out of that, the last 6 months have all been dominated by the next big thing in tech, which seems to be AI. So I think from our perspective, as we always say, technology, brings up with the next big pivot and the next, wave of innovation kind of gets unleashed. I think we're at the beginning of another unleashing of a fairly large opportunity, both for us and our customers, in how they can embrace this massive opportunity to bring in not only productivity, but a whole new way of doing business, especially as they engage with their end customers. So I think it's a pretty interesting time. We're really, at the cusp of some really cool work that's going to get done.
Nitin, what's your view on IT spending in the US and Europe in the second half of this year? We're hearing reports that clients have been cutting costs, especially in discretionary spending. What's the situation that you've been seeing on the ground on that?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, the last 12 months have been a fairly headwinded macro environment, just given the fact that, we went through an unprecedented interest rate tightening phase where we went from 0 to 5%, in just 12 months in the US. And the rest of the world has followed through as well. So there was definitely, a very large cyclical downturn in sectors that were so tightly associated with the interest rate environment, whether it was parts of consumer finance, mortgages. Of course, we've seen the impact of that play out in the real estate side as well. So that definitely led to a fairly uncertain environment. I think we joke that we're still, we are waiting for the recession we were promised, but without that clarity, I think it was very hard for customers to make a decision on how to allocate spend, what kind of budgets to run with. So That has been a fairly headwinded environment, especially in sectors that I mentioned are linked to the interest rate cycles. Having said that, I think, as I mentioned in our last quarter earnings call as well a couple of weeks ago, we've started to see at least some unlocking of decision making. We've definitely seen green shoots of activity build up, even on the sectors like mortgage, where I think things are starting to pick up a little bit, given the fact that the consensus now is that we are at the beginning of the end of the interest rate tightening cycle. So I think early days, green shoots visible, long way to go. Haven't really, seen complete certainty on which way the macro will head. But having said that, we're starting to see a little bit of activity pick up. I think we'll still have another 3 to 6 months of this uncertain phase before we can clearly see which way the macro is headed.
So are you in agreement with what many of the analysts have been saying about pain in the entire IT sector? And if so, how long do you believe this pain is likely to last for the industry?
We've already been in that kind of an environment for the last, I would say 3 to 4 quarters. As I mentioned, at least in our business, with the deal flow, the closure of large TCV, some uptick in activity on the decision-making side, at least there seems to be a base formation in play. I mean, if you think about the way the business is run, right, there is a origination phase where you originate opportunities, then there is a decision phase, and then there is a conversion phase. Origination was never a problem. I think there was a lot of activity in the pipeline for all of our companies in the industry. Then, of course, we've seen some movement positively in the decision making of awarding those contracts. What we haven't yet fully seen is the conversion from TCV to revenue is still a little bit slower, but I think that should improve and pick up as we get through the remainder of the year and early part of next year. So hard to call exactly, where the things will turn because of uncertainty, and of course with the recent situation around the US rating, that obviously adds a little bit more to the uncertainty. But having said that, as I mentioned, there are green shoots visible of at least activity picking up in certain parts of the segments of our business.
Nitin, in a recent interview, you said that ChatGPT has shown people what AI can do, but that your company doesn't need to compete with ChatGPT or GPT-4, but instead use it for efficiency. An interesting and an important point. Can you elaborate on that? And how do you envisage the use of AI for the industry as a whole, and for your company in particular?
I think if you think about what GPT-4 or ChatGPT is, it's really an instantation or an open source platform made available to the wide world, which basically is now applicable. From our perspective, every customer has an opportunity to use some element of AI. And GPT-4 is one large instantation of a large language model, but that's not the only way to use AI. I think what we've seen, what the biggest impact that GPT-4 or ChatGPT has had is it has actually made this conversation mainstream with the client community and with the boardrooms. We've been on this cloud and cognitive pivot for the last 7 years at Mphasis. We've built out a whole tribes and squad model based on the front to back transformation driven by cloud and cognitive. So for us, it's been coming for a while. We've had algorithms available on hyperscaler marketplaces for better part of 5 years. But what this has really done is given us the opportunity to truly make that conversation mainstream. And the first set of applications and use cases, no surprise, coming out of how do I transform the way I engage with my end consumers. Right? So customer experience transformation is probably the biggest use case right now that we are seeing play out, whether it is through conversational AI or some element of design embedded in it. Second, we can then start thinking about how do I truly change the way we think of customer engagement and embed AI in almost every element of our engagement, whether it is customer service contact center, whether it is the app, whether it is even a physical branch where the customer is going to walk in. It's a fairly high opportunity area for that. And then third, if you think about how do I change the productivity element that sits in my technology shop, right? We've talked a lot about developer productivity. So I think those are some early use cases. We see GPT-4 as a tool that can be embedded in multiple applications. But there are other very large, powerful platforms that are being thought of. Obviously, there are large language models that will come out of almost large hyperscaler as well. So I think to me, when I say that we don't compete with GPT-4, because it's a tool that's available for us to apply to our customer businesses rather than, and we are obviously, the more tools there are, the better opportunity there is for us to continue to leverage them in creating these applications. So, we are the application side of the house. We will make applications come live through AI. We will embed AI in almost every business process, in every customer interaction, in every part of the value chain for their business.
It's still early, of course, in the entire AI cycle, but do you eventually see the benefits of AI going to the client side or coming to the IT industry, and specifically to the IT industry in India, which used to do a lot of the work that, maybe people will say that now AI can do some of that work, but on the other hand, the Indian IT industry may be also positioned to say, we can help implement AI for you wherever in the world you are.
So Vikram, I think it's a bit of both. And this is not the first time that we're seeing a pivot that will impact or change some element of what we deliver and what we bring to customers. Over the last 20 years, we've had these waves come every 4 or 5 years. I think at this point in time, the opportunity is fairly large for all our companies in the sector. But at the same time, we also cannot take for granted what we do today will be done in the same way. If we don't embrace parts of what's available and embed them in our service offerings, will definitely have a disruptive effect from a client standpoint, because clients are looking for, if they needed a certain number of capacity, whether it was through a number of agile teams or pods, they're not going to need that much for the same level of service. But keep in mind, we are in an environment where software is still leading the world. So net, there is more demand for software each year than it was in the year prior. And that really is the big tailwind. And if you now overlay that with the wave that we started with the cloud migration and the adoption of cloud in all things tech stack, I think the opportunity is still pretty large. So net, yes, there will be some cannibalization or effect of AI on the type of services we deliver, but overall, I think there's a bigger tailwind than a headwind. And we've seen that play out over the last many years. I'll give you an example. 10 years ago, a very large portion of Indian IT used to be providing testing services. That has shrunk by an order of magnitude in the last 10 years because of availability of DevOps and agile development methodology. So I think it's another way of thinking about how do we renovate our service offerings so we can continue to stay ahead of the curve as it relates to capturing net new addressable market versus just seeing the market shrink for us.
One last question, which is, of course, a question that many people are concerned about, the entire question of reducing headcounts. Are we going to be seeing layoffs and companies not replacing attrition, maybe replacing people with AI? How do you see the entire headcount and the job factor playing itself out as we go forward?
Yeah, I think I'm in a pretty straightforward school of thought there. The camp I belong to is that it's not that AI will take away jobs. It's just that people who don't use AI will lose their jobs. So I think it's a lot to do with upgrading of skills. It's a lot to do with providing the right platform for people to be able to use and embed AI in their daily life, especially in our industry. So I think it's a pretty straightforward path. We have to make sure that we create net new skills and reskill people, and at the same time, our clients will need those same services and the help on that front as well. So I think we are very focused on creating that upskilling and cross-skilling environment for our people, and of course, embedding AI in many of our processes that we follow at Mphasis itself.
All right, thank you so much, Nitin Rakesh, the CEO of Mphasis, speaking to us on the India story. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.